Thank you very much for coming today to this event with Alison Cornyn. I've been looking forward to this, and actually, Alison and I have been trying to connect to do this for a while. But before I introduce Alison, I want to say a few other things. One is that okay, so this is the March Justice Forum event. I want to thank everyone who makes Justice Forum possible. All the people at the Heyman Center, Eileen Giluli, Lindsay Trump was somewhere back there. Of course, Isabel Gillick, who does the tech. Ivan Killa, who's downstairs. Anya Connell, who is JIE alumna and now is doing her, she's at the law school. Before we start with Alison, I want to mention a few things that we just need to be aware of. One is that we were not expecting this show of force of the NYPD outside Barnard today. We were not expecting the force with which the NYPD came. Those of us who have actually worked on the history of social movements in the United States and elsewhere, I'm sure we know that this is something that does remind us of 1968 repeatedly. And I just want to note that the university is this really utopian space, as Edward Said had named it, where the free exchange of research ideas, even affect, has been taking place since the beginnings of the university as an institution in the 13th century, is rapidly coming not under attack, but under threat of extinction, the way that we know it. So I just want to underline the fact that we are at this point at a really very, very dangerous juncture. The White House announced yesterday that Columbia is under threat of losing $51.5 million for, as I understood it, for each demonstration that takes place on campus. Already research has been, money for research at the medical school has been curtailed. Research protocols that had been going on for years were stopped overnight. So we need to be aware and on our toes. The other thing that I wanted to say, which is closely related to the future of the university, is that at JIE, the Just Education Initiative, as you know, we have classes, we offer classes both to incarcerated people in situ, so Sing Sing, Taconic, MDC Brooklyn, the federal, Rikers, Queensboro, and also on campus. Since the inauguration, we have lost, 4 people have died in New York City, actually New York jails and prisons, and one of our alumnus has been deported. I mentioned the alumnus, our alumnus Blair, Nascimento Blair, in the February event, but now I want to mention the fact that a person who had taken classes with me inside was killed, or rather was found dead. Was not killed. He was found dead in his cell last week at Sing Sing. And a person who had taken classes with Audrey and Noor was killed by the guards at Rikers. Yes, I mean at Marcy yesterday. So I'm going to give Audrey and Noor just about 10 minutes to talk about this. Audrey Anselm teaches at the Music Hum inside, and she has been teaching at Rikers along with Mia Rota, and she has floor. Yeah, Audrey has floor. Audrey, thank you.
Should I do this?
Yeah, come here so that the
I could just.
here, yes, no.
Nora, do you want to join?
Come sit so that,
One of the two you sit. with.
yeah, just sit there and then we'll. Okay. Welcome.
Okay, hi, everybody. As Nani just said, one of our GIE students, Messiah Nantui, was brutally killed on Saturday at Mid-State facility by a group of officers. 15 officers have been suspended since then or under investigation. But from what we know, it was incredibly brutal murder. And Messiah was our student. He was our music student. He took 2 classes with me, music humanities, as well as an independent study on Tupac that we conducted at RNDC, where he was a few years ago. Noor was my teaching assistant, as well as Ben, who's here, who still works with me at Rikers. And both of them knew Messiah well, as well as Ivan, who I haven't seen, but who'd come to my class as well. Nora is going to say a few words about Messiah, and then I wanted to actually read one of Messiah's many brilliant essays and share it with you. Do you want to talk about?
Yeah. Do I need to press anything? Okay. I didn't like write a speech or anything, but Mia called me yesterday to tell me, and I like remembered Messiah particularly well because we did speak a lot in the class about, sorry, Audrey, not just music, but we would talk a lot about the classes that I was taking. I studied sociology at Columbia, and I was taking race, ethnicity, and education at the time, and power, politics, and society, classic sociology classes. And we would talk a lot about power, and I told him about my readings about the freedom schools in the South, and he was really interested in how like privilege worked and racial injustice, and we would always have conversations about that. And so every time I had a reading in class, I would print it out, and I don't know if I was allowed, but I would bring him readings, and he would read them in the week, and then the next time I would go in, we would talk about them. And he really was just so smart, like smarter than me, and understood what I was learning about in a way that was way more tangible than, reading off of a page. So yeah, I just wanted to share that. And, so he's not just a name or an inmate, as the news often like headlines it. But he was super smart and kind and really interested in, what was going on in the world, and so insightful about, both his situation in life and what was going on in the outside world. And we would talk about current events a lot. Yeah, I just think that he had so much potential, and he would have gone on to live so like great of a life, especially with the mind that he has had. Yeah. So yeah.
Definitely agree. He was, I think, smarter than me as well. Amazing blues connoisseur, much more than I ever knew about blues. Huge B.B. King fan, among others of his interests. Okay, I want to read an essay he wrote where he's actually telling his life story, at least part of his life story, and how that impacted his outlook on life. A part of which defines you as a human is how you face and overcome obstacles. In my life, I faced a lot of obstacles. One of the most memorable and life-changing challenges I faced was getting shot 27 times by police at 18. When I woke up handcuffed to the hospital bed, surrounded by police, nothing was the same. I couldn't speak, eat, drink, walk, or move much. I was having nightmares where I was getting shot close range, then waking up. To be honest, I was frightened for myself and my future, since I was being charged with 6 attempts murders on police. This experience, in a way, represents the end of one life and the beginning of a new life. I flatlined multiple times that night, lost pints of blood, underwent multiple emergency surgeries. Not only was I faced with physical obstacles, but mental and spiritual obstacles presented themselves in the form of PTSD, anxiety, and paranoia. The support of my family, friends, and community helped me realize the support system I had. A companion of mine was there for me a lot during the troubling times. Although this was a catastrophe in many ways, it was also a blessing in disguise. Through this experience, I witnessed the power of God and the power of love. I learned who had my back and who didn't. I realized a portion of my power and full potential. It also made me appreciate life and its every blessing, like being able to stand, drink, eat, and speak at your own free will. This experience changed my outlook and perspective on life. I began valuing dreams, goals, and aspirations more and using every day as a new opportunity to be the person I aspire to be. I care more about legacy and relationships because when you've seen what I've seen, you realize that the relationships and memory are all that matter. Money, house, feelings, and problems all come and go. I enjoy buffalo wings more. For inspiration, I look to people like 50 Cent, who went through something similar, overcame it, and used it to his advantage. Instead of letting the situation define him and his life, he took the situation and redefined himself.
Thank you. Thank you, Audrey. Thank you, Noah. We are going to be discussing today the New York House of Refuge with Alison.
And New York State Training School for Girls.
And then New York, yes, and New York State, yes. Yes, and but you'll run it.
Yes.
You'll run it. Initially, obviously, I'm not Mia Reuter. Initially, Mia was going to be discussing, was going to be the discussant for Alison's talk, but Mia is sick. Apparently she got with this horrible thing that has been going around. So let me just introduce Alison and Mia as if Mia was here. And then we'll go on. So Alison Cornyn is an interdisciplinary artist, researcher, and educator, and her work often incorporates public memory and archives. For over 20 years, Alison has initiated new forms of storytelling in installations and online, investigating pressing social issues from multiple perspectives. Many of her projects address the US criminal legal system and mass incarceration. Her current project, Incorrigibles, examines youth justice for girls in New York, past and present. Incorrigibles investigates the long-term use of stigmatizing language to define and confine young women and tells the stories of women who were incarcerated in their youth to create an archive of first-person testimonies that counter and broaden institutional histories. Her work has received numerous awards, including a Creative Capital Award for her pioneering interactive documentary about US prisons, a Peabody Award, the Gracie Allen for Women in Media Award, and Pius Batten Award for Innovation. She serves on the board of the New York City Municipal Archives and teaches at SVA at the School of Visual Arts in New York City. And she has, you can follow that on the website. And Mia Reuter, who is not here, is the Education and Outreach Manager for the Society Fellows, the Heyman Center. She coordinates the educational programs offered by JA in New York jails. She's a doctoral student in art and art education at TC, at Teachers College, and received an MFA in art from Hunter College in New York. And I am Nani Banerjee. I'm the JIE academic advisor. I'm an anthropologist, and I also teach inside. So we're going to be discussing confinement, rehabilitation, retribution, punishment, the way that each one of them slides and lapses into each other. I just want to note that the first School of Refuge in New York City was established in 1825. Second one not in New York City, but in New York. The second was in Boston in 1826. The third one was in Philadelphia in 1828. And Alexis de Tocqueville writes in 1828 that he's certain that another one was just about to open in Baltimore. The objective was to disaggregate young people from older, and as the charter of the School of Refuge mentioned, from older and those older criminals and those whom, and I quote, whom age had hardened in crime, right? So the objective was to disaggregate young people from older people who had engaged in deviant behavior, and as again, as the Tocqueville says, the discipline of the House of Refuge was to be neither too severe for youth nor too mild for the guilty. And that's a very interesting just position that de Tocqueville places there. And he further says that the House of Refuge was meant to remove the youth from too rigorous a punishment and from the dangers of impunity, And I found that to be an incredibly interesting and powerful way of placing the impunity, right, alongside punishment. So what I'm going to say is that the first time that I saw this project was in 2016, when we had a project on aging that we run at JAE, and we had a 2-day workshop. And Alison at the time you were sort of beginning the project, right? And you brought this diary, this composite book that we looked at, and we have it right there. You're going to talk about how you found this, right?
Yes.
And this is it. I'm shutting up. Thank you so much, Alison, for being here.
Thank you,
so
Nani,
much.
for the invitation. I'm sorry Mia can't be here, but hopefully she's on Zoom and she's here in spirit.
Yeah.
And just so you know, Mia and I have met through Humanities New York and the Mellon Foundation for the past 3 years. They started a program called the Post-Incarceration Humanities Partnership Grants. And so this past year, Mia was was a recipient of one, and through Columbia, as was the Incorrigibles project and our team. And so we've gotten to know each other a bit through that, and that granting program has been really supportive to many organizations working with formerly incarcerated people throughout New York, and hopefully it'll continue. So I just want to acknowledge too how important these kinds of forums are, especially now, you know, with current administration, with kind of the moral shift. I'm already reading about how, in terms of young people's incarceration, there's the plans to go back to, you know, putting youth in adult prisons and using solitary confinement and kind of doing away with some of the progress that we had made. Not that that's much progress, because no kids should be in prison, but there's going to be a backlash. So we really need to be having these conversations and meeting and trying to understand what happened in the past, so we can you know, deal with the present and you know, envision a better future. So I'm going to start. So Incorrigibles is really, I guess, to give, many people probably know about this, but in the current prison population for women is about 10% of the prison population is women. It's the fastest growing, but it's and women's prisons, because women are and young women especially are such a small part of the population. There's not always a lot of attention that goes to their stories and also to support for what's happening with them inside. So Incorrigibles grew it grew out of a project that I was working on earlier in 2011 called the Prison Public Memory Project. The Governor Cuomo at the time had said that he was going to close at least 7 prisons. It ended up being 11. And because the prison population was going down economically, it didn't make sense to keep them open. And so, having worked around the criminal legal system and incarceration for many years, I realized that very often communities, they have this knee-jerk reaction. They want to keep the prison in their community because of economic development or other reasons. So we started to think, the colleague that I worked on it with at the time, that if we could work with the community to help them understand how the prison got there in the first place, and then we could do these community visioning sessions. So people, once the prison closed, then they could bring something in that would be more positive for the community. At the time, there was, I'll go into the story in a short video, but this trove of documents showed up in a yard sale in Hudson. It was found and bought for $5 by a thrift shop owner. And at the time, she shared them with me because she knew that I was doing research on that institution. We had thought that this institution in Hudson, New York, since it was easily convertible into something else, might close. So it opened as the Women's House of Refuge in 1887. It wasn't the first one in New York, but and then from 1904 to 1975, it became the New York State Training School for Girls. 1975 to the present, it's currently a medium security men's prison, the Hudson Correctional Facility. So, thinking that might close, we started doing research, and then these documents were shared. And so they became part of the deeper research into the training school. What I was able to do is pull together, of all these documents in the box, piece together stories of girls who were there based on their photographs and their intake forms and letters home and newspaper clippings and things like that. And I had the opportunity early on to, on the prison grounds, there's a superintendent's mansion, and historic Hudson, because it's architecturally notable, every year they open it up for 2 weekends and people walk through. So I had asked if I could present, bring the girls back into the institution that had been there, because some of them had worked there. They used it as overflow classrooms. And so then we could have conversations at the end of if anybody wanted to, after they had the architectural tour and saw the exhibition, conversations about youth justice then and now. So I blew up some of the photographs that had been in the box, kind of larger than life, and then recreated some of the other documents and kind of strew them on the floor and left them there kind of as if they would have been kind of left to the dust of history. So it was then that, so each girl had her own room, and then there was this book that I'd started putting together that was kind of, if you wanted to trace their stories, you could find it in that, and then we could have these conversations afterwards. But it was really with the bringing the girls into seeing them in their rooms and realizing that their stories would have been lost, and many other stories about the lives in this institution would have never been known if this box hadn't been found. And it was almost like they were saying, you know, we want to be known. We want our stories to be known, and that's what really kind of brought Incorrigibles to life. So rather than continuing to do the Prison Public Memory Project, as important as it is to envision with communities other things they want to bring in, but I really wanted to understand what had changed and what hadn't changed in youth justice for girls from this institution's perspective on. So this is a short video that kind of goes into the story a little bit more and what transpired from that point. And then we're gonna start it, and we're gonna wait to make sure that the audio works on Zoom. And that it plays.
Lights on? Do you want lights on?
Actually, the audio is not playing in here. Is that audio on or no?
Me hoes, what does it matter? I'm 12 years old. What does it matter the things I've seen more than most at 17? What does it matter that my eyes are black? Obviously, I deserved that slap, or
No,
was it a
there's-
kiss? I can't remember the cause of this. Perhaps I stood and then I fell and winded up in a grown-up hell.
Yeah. Might be difficult. It's hooked up here.
To be corrected.
Let's see if there's an audience from here.
Okay.
I did.
There we go.
Me hoes, what does it matter? I'm 12 years old. What does it matter the things I've seen more than most at 17? What does it matter that my eyes are black? Obviously, I deserved that slap, or was it a kiss? I can't remember the cause of this. Perhaps I stood and then I fell and winded up in a grown-up hell.
She was deemed incorrigible, and this of course always raises questions about what exactly is to be corrected.
I wasn't wrong. I was adventurous. I had a mind of my own.
The Wanderer.
The situations aren't right. It's time to go. That's something I believe in today. The situation isn't right. It's time to go. This story begins with a box sold at a yard sale in
It's in New York.
The box contained documents from the 1920s and 30s. Personal photos of letters, clippings, medical records, intake forms, and paperwork. All the content had to do with girls. But then incarcerated on state training school for girls.
U.S. The training school was open. As many as 15,000 girls did time there.
Unlimited time, 10 years. Stories.
On December 28th in 1930, a young girl wrote to her mother,
Dear Mother, I'm down here in Hudson for training. I don't know much about it because I got here only last night, but I like it so far. I played games and sewed last night. I have a beautiful room. There are 10 girls here with me, but in all over 400 girls. I hope you have a nice New Year. How's Grandma and Gramps? With best wishes, your daughter, Gladys.
12-year-old Gladys had been the victim of a rape and forced marriage to a boarder in her home in Fulton County, New York. Her mother and mother's boyfriend, as well as the boarder, were charged with second-degree rape. Gladys was sent to the training school by authorities who labeled her
"Oh, menace," for trying to tell her story.
In 1910, training school manager Annie Allen wrote, "Our chief task and aim was to live with girls, to protect them, but the cultural consequences of being girls." This trove of documents that had been spirited out of the institution led to a quest to find out more about these invisible girls. I put up a website and posted on social media, and people started to write in, asking for information or share
Stories about why their mothers, sisters, or aunts
had been incarcerated at this training school.
In 1912, my mother was born. Around 1915, her mother takes off. Nobody has any explanation. She was there one day and she was gone. And my mother was, I think, 5 or 6, and she is put on a train. Her ticket pinned to her jacket, she said, Norfolk, Virginia, is supposed to be an aunt. She goes to live with her, and this woman abused her terribly. After so many years, she's sent back to her grandparents' house to live. She had 2 brothers, and one of her brothers was a known pedophile. I don't know when she came back, if he assaulted her or what happened, but something happened on that farm that she went berserk. At that point, everything went crazy for her, and they take and put her in the juvenile hall.
I adored my big sister. She began running away when she was 12 and I was 6. My parents started saying, if this keeps up, just kind of normal, typical teenage acting out, smoking, running with guys, and then running away. They said she was wild. That was how they interpreted it. They didn't look at the way she was treated within the family. So they started threatening to send her away, and they sent her away when I was in 1st grade.
They committed to the training school when they were young and wanted to tell their stories.
In 1968, my grandmother died, and it seemed
My mother had tuberculosis.
so she was hospitalized, and my father stopped coming home. It was February 6, 1969, when Mrs. Ellis from the Catholic Guardian Society came to 657 20th Street and took us all. Like thieves in the night. They sent my oldest two sisters together. They sent the three boys together, but they sent me to a home all by myself. And I did not like it, so I rebelled. The judge said I was
And because I was an incorrigible kid, and he sent me to Hudson State Training School for Girls.
They put you on a bus, and off you go, upstate somewhere. It was terrifying to say the least. So they tried to make us be perfect little girls through fear and intimidation. And I became a person just like that. I became a bully. I kind of became the label that they put on me. There was different cliques that you moved with. Slick, sly, wicked, and wild. That was the main Wild Four group. We had to be hip, so I was slick. And Valerie Carson was Snooky. And then I forget her name. And her name is Yvonne. She was a very tall black girl who was pregnant. And that was the first time I'd ever seen a teenage pregnancy. And they took her in. We were there because nobody wanted us. So our common bond was we felt rejected. We got a certain camaraderie on each other. So I couldn't understand why nobody loved me. And then I began to act like a defective character. Nobody loves me, okay, fuck boys. And that's when I became, Crazy Lizzie. Dizzy Lizzie. Not something I'm proud of now, but the mindset. But I could go back there in 2 minutes, how I felt. It took me a long time
to understand that I'm not there anymore.
But those feelings were just as real today as they were then.
I grew up in Rochester, New York. I'm the oldest, and I'm the only one that went to reformatory school. I got sent away to Hudson, New York because I kept stealing, I was shoplifting, and I kept running away from home. I would run away a lot because my friends wanted to go to parties, and my mother did not play the house party scene. And I wasn't the type to talk back to my parents. I never, ever raised my voice. So my way of acting out was I would say I'm going to the store and just wouldn't come back. I had a loving home. I just was rebellious, and I just wanted to do what I wanted to do. One of the incidents that probably did send me up the river, I went to Learners with some friends of mine because I ran away in the dead of winter and didn't have a coat. So I stole the suede coat. But apparently they have a camera system, and I wasn't aware of that. So when they finally caught up with me and I was in court, they were talking about the incident at Learners, and I was like, well, I was never in Learners. They put the old videotape on, it was a black and white video, and it was me. And still I was in denial, oh, that's not me. And I meant that, the judge wasn't having it, so he was fed up. I wasn't staying put, I wouldn't stop stealing. They decided the best thing for me was to go to a reformatory school. It wasn't like you dreaded being there, you just dreaded being locked up.
We're doing a lot of punitive things to women and girls in the name of empowering them and treating their trauma.
In the juvenile system, what you had was a rhetoric, at least in the early decades, of saving and protecting kids, which then morphed into mass incarceration of especially girls. We start in the 20s with sexual immorality and waywardness. And by the 50s and 60s, we're getting person in need of supervision. So the language is changing, but the things that happen to the girls don't change.
Records and interviews revealed that many girls have been physically or sexually abused. Why had they consented, not their abusers? These girls were proven transgressions by the law and authority. Evidence that had to be silenced, punished. One of these incorrigible girls named Ella Fitzgerald. Ella was sentencing was from 1930s running away from her own prison cell. Events critical.
Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders.
Opposite multiplied. File of private client and distributed. Full account, structured memory of the injustices of the past can shed light on the present and prevent the injustices of the future. 40 years after the last Incorrigible girl left the training school in 1975, girls from the home and an after-school program came together
For a
for
workshp.
After conducting their own archival research and hearing stories of girls before them, they reframed the words then and now to define young. Not wild, they said. Free. Proud. Not defiant. Strong. Awkward. Survivor. Delinquent. Courageous. Disobedient. Determined. People. Yes.
So I thought in terms of the presentation, I would like to, this project has been going on for more years than I'd anticipated. And it kind of, I find that it presents opportunities and needs, and I follow them. So, so one of the things that has grown out of the project. Well, maybe I'll turn the audio, turn this audio off. Should I turn this audio off? This one off? Okay.
And we also have to do this.
Thank you. Okay. So at the end of the film, you heard a little bit about this workshop that was done with it was an intergenerational workshop with in Hudson, New York, with women from girls from a group home and an after school program, and Hudson Opera House, which is offered their space to us, and we had a week-long sociodrama girl power workshop. And it was really an experiment. I had run into somebody who was an acolyte of a man named J.L. Moreno. J.L. Moreno had been brought to the training school in the 30s. He's known as the father of social networks. And he had been brought to the training school because they wanted, as the director of research, they wanted to understand why girls were running away. And so his thinking was that the girls were running away because they didn't like the people they were living with. And so he created this incredible map of every girl's relationship with every other girl. And then he also was doing workshops with them, doing role playing. So when they got out, they could be a maid or a waitress or something, and they would kind of, and he filmed those. So some of that that footage is in the film, actually. It's from the 1930s. And so when I met this person who was a protege of his, and he was doing sociodrama, I said, we have to do this work together. I normally don't do performance work. And so he and he did these performance exercises with the girls, and I shared the oral histories and some of the storytelling. And then the girls each chose somebody whose story they wanted to further research, and then create these theatrical vignettes related to their own experiences and the stories of the girls who've been at the training school. And I called, so this is Lily on the right. Lily was at the training school in the 60s, and she's a badass. And I called Lily to say that we were doing this workshop, and there was going to be a presentation on the weekend, and we were going to have a community conversation, and did she want to come to that? And she said, I'm off. She's like, I want to come to the whole thing. So Lily came, and it really, Lily really transformed the experience in a way that made it incredible, because part of what Lily did was tell her own story in the circles that we had. And then Roy Ford in the back, he Roy suggested that we create a social sculpture out of Lily's story. So each person went into the center of the room kind of, and starting with the beginning of Lily's story, held like a fixed sculptural position that represented that moment in her life. And then by the time everybody went in, it was this incredible sculpture of bodies that kind of went from the ceiling, from like the sky to the ground. And Lily was so moved by being part of that and seeing her life represented that way, that and she said, you know, I thought I was healed. She's like, but she's like, really, this is really, she said, this is beyond what I could have even imagined. And so this project, I realized healing is a very important aspect to it in terms of understanding where people come from and the trauma that very often underlies the people in incarceration and the people being punished rather than for what they're doing rather than being cared for. And so another one of the workshops that we do are these wand making workshops. They're symbols of power and healing, and girls make them, and very often they're made in honor of girls or women who were at the training school or the House of Refuge and given to the project, and in other cases people make them for themselves. And in one workshop it was mostly formerly incarcerated people, and it turns, and one woman made this incredible, she decided that she wanted to make a wand that was the trajectory of her life. And so, and there's all kinds of materials. Many of the materials are from the grounds of the training school, and other things are just things people give me or that I find. I'm a collector. And she made a wand that was all broken shards of glass on the handle. And then by the end, it was kind of cowrie shells for the years that she was in prison, and then some these kind of beautiful free horsehairs and butterflies at the end. So anyway, and so people do them for all different reasons, but as much as people think Harry Potter when they think wands, and I'm sometimes embarrassed to even talk about it, there's something about these wands that are really powerful and moving, and also the process of making them, it's kind of, it's similar to kind of like a sewing circle. And so people, you're doing things with your hands, and you're having these conversations that are really kind of very beautiful. Another workshop that we did this past summer was Ona. You've heard Ona in the film talking about her sister, Andra, who was at the training school. Ona is an incredible writer. She's just written 2 books about her sister, one for young adults and one about her sister's life. It's a memoir because her sister's life ended tragically. So this past summer, Ona, we did intergenerational workshops with young women from Perfect 10 in Hudson. And every summer now, the women who were at the training school, who are now part of the project, who were mostly interviewed and who want to get together, come together to do these workshops and be with one another. So so this was one of the writing workshops that Ona hosted, and the girls didn't want to write anything at first, and then she would trick them into like to the, you know, the writing that they came up with was very beautiful, but these prompts that she gave were surprising and very fun. And so this was just some of the wand making materials, and this was these were the wands made at the end that they wanted to kind of show. Many of these materials have been folded into an exhibition. It's a traveling exhibition. The exhibition is one aspect. We do the intergenerational workshops, and then we also do other public programs. And they are in art spaces and also very non-traditional spaces as well. And this exhibition version of the exhibition was at the Brooklyn Federal Courthouse. They have a gallery there, because the judges at one point when they were redoing it said, you know, what do you want? They said, we want light and we want art. So it's one of the most beautiful courthouses because it has a gallery and it's very light filled. So this is a piece that, since language is so important to the project, I had been gathering words from archival documents and also more contemporary words like defiant disorder. And I was going through Ngrams. Google Ngrams map the use of a word from 1800 to the present. And so I had been gathering these graphs of individual words. And I wasn't sure what I was going to do with them. And then I was reading one of the Board of Charities reports, and I was reading about how the girls were, the training was usually not academic. They were being trained to become maids or housekeepers or do a lot of home economics. And so one thing that they were doing was they learned how to do embroidery. And I was thinking about how when you do it, this is called the language sampler. When you do a sampler of stitches, you do the same stitch over and over and over until you perfect it. And it's in the same way that a word is placed on you over and over and over again, you almost become it. And so this just maps out those words over time. And again, there's the large portraits of the girls interspersed with quotes from women who were there, who are now in their 60s and 70s and 80s. The stories really are a central part of the project. So this is called the Stories installation. There's a version of this book with many of the documents in it. And then you can put headphones on and listen to longer oral histories or testimonies from the women who've been interviewed and want to share their stories. And then on the wall, there are pictures of documents that are in the book. Over on the right is the map I was talking to you about. That's the sociometric map that J.L. Moreno did. There are other pages that are there that are actually in the book. This is a code of morals. This was put in all the girls' rooms in the 30s when they were there. Also, there's some of the documents are from a study by a sociologist named Rose Gilambardo. She wrote a book called The Social World of Imprisoned Girls, and she spent a year she went to a youth prison for girls on the West and the Midwest, and then at the New York State Training School for Girls. And she was able to have conversations with the girls that were very, where they really opened up to her. And they talked to her, and she's documented what they call the racket. And actually Nina Bernstein, who wrote a great book called The Lost Children of Wilder, is referred quite a bit to Rose Gilambardo's work. But there was a whole kind of social system within the institution that the authorities didn't know about or weren't supposed to know about. And there would be these complex family structures where girls would get married and they would create these large families, and you had to get approval from your parents if you were going to get married. And then there was number codes that were used to communicate so the staff wouldn't know what was happening. And also acronyms, kind of like today's texting, like there's Holland, hope our love lasts and never dies. And then very often there were kind of song lyrics that represented relationships. Girls would, a marriage would be at the time when they would go to the chapel. If a Bible dropped and two girls stood up, that was a wedding. So there was all kinds of things that were happening there that were being done, outside of the purview of the institution, because they really didn't want that. I mean, it was a very controlling place and often very violent. Also, the girls they were called femmes and butches, and the butches would part the hair on one side and wear like double socks. They'd have thicker ankles. So there was all kinds of things happening, and they would take on other names and things like that. So Rose Gilambardo did a lot of work around that. When I spoke to women about it, very often they didn't talk about the racket. I don't know if that's something that Rose Gilambardo came up with as a name. When I talk to women, they talk about cliques. So this exhibition was at the Ann Street Gallery, which is on the grounds in Newburgh, New York, below Safe Harbors of the Hudson. And this is part of our crew there at the opening. There's Hilda in the middle, who you'll be hearing more about. Standing next to me on the left is Kathleen Hulser. Kathleen Hulser was our public historian. Kathleen died suddenly just last year, and tragically. But Kathleen, as her spirit and her soul and her research are all part of this, deeply embedded in this project. And then you see from Cynthia, Jackie, and Hilda here. We always ask people, what does incorrigible mean to you? Again, it's about language and it's about definition and defining it yourself. Very often people want to reclaim that word. I'll go into this a little more. There is a cemetery on the prison grounds. Again, this is something Nina Bernstein wrote about in her book, because when Shirley, the book is about a foster care case, and Shirley Wilder was the main plaintiff in the case. Shirley Wilder ran away. She was at the training school. She ran away, and she told Nina about running through a cemetery when she was there. And so Nina, when I read her book and spoke to Nina about it, I asked to get permission to go photograph the cemetery on the prison grounds. So I was able to do that, and it was kind of derelict. They've still since cleared it up, but I've also, I've been haunted ever since by these girls and babies that are buried there. And so this summer we did a memorial ceremony that I'll go to. This project is used, I've worked with the Vera Institute of Justice. They have an amazing initiative to end girls' incarceration. It started in New York, now it's national, and they're doing amazing work. And so they, it was really helpful for them to have this project to refer to how long-standing some of these issues are that are still around today, that they're still dealing with. And so we did a film screening, and then had a community conversation that was really valuable at the Irondale Center in New York. Again, we always try and have these public presentations to talk about then and now. This was when the exhibition was at the Brooklyn Federal Courthouse. We were able to have a panel at the Brooklyn Law School, and so with people who were focused on the history of, or the present issues around women and girls incarceration, and some of the women who were at the training school took part in that. So this past summer, it was going to be last summer. There's the cemetery on the prison grounds, houses, so there's girls and babies that are buried there. It's most likely that they were from when it was the House of Refuge, but also in the last burial that we are aware of is in 1938, which is when it was the training school. So it took a lot of work to get permission, because it's a functional prison. There's a shooting range on the grounds. But I had really wanted, and I spoke to the women about it. Where do you want to go next summer? Because we get these grants, and then we have to kind of plan what we want to do when we apply. And so they said, we want to go to Hudson. We want to tour the institution. We want to see our cottage, and we want to see where we were housed, and we want to honor the girls and babies that are there. So we were able to get the tour of the grounds, and then we held a memorial ceremony where the mayor of Hudson was invited, and he spoke. He hadn't known that this cemetery was even there. And each of the women who were there said something. There was a wonderful dancer, Amanda Krish, did a dance in the cemetery. And then Reverend Kim Singletary, who's a reverend in Hudson, did the closing kind of the closing prayer, and she kind of really honored the dance, because I think some of because the prison administration was there too, and I think some people don't really know what to do with the dance in a cemetery. But she really, she talked about how the previous week she had her sermon was about the importance of dance, and it really kind of validated the beauty and the importance of that. Everybody was given roses that they could leave on the graves. And so this summer, we plan to go back to Statsburg and Hudson to work again, to do intergenerational workshops with young women there, and to learn genealogical research, to try and find out more information about the girls and babies that are there, and to create an offsite memorial. And because the interviews some of the interviews that have been done come from the from people reaching out because they're doing their own genealogical research, and they find out that their relative had been at the training school, because the census has people listed as inmates. And then even the babies are inmates that are like 0.3 years old. So, so I had this wonderful young woman, Monsi, who's gone off to do great things, work with me one summer, and we decided to reverse engineer Ancestry. And so I was able to talk to somebody at Ancestry about how to make a family tree of all of the girls that were listed in the census as having been there. And so she basically said, you can't do it like that, because since they're not biologically related, you're going to break our system if you make them all. I was going to make them sisters, but because there were tribes, Native American tribes, that were wanting to create genealogical communities that weren't biologically related, they'd come up with a system that she shared that with me. So we created on Ancestry this tree of 2,100 girls and babies. And I don't know if you know how Ancestry works, but if your relative is mentioned on somebody else's tree, a little leaf sprouts up, and then you can click on that leaf to see where else that the relative is listed and what it is. And so then we have an Incorrigibles page that explains that the relative was at the training school and a little bit more about it. And to say we can share information if they want to do an interview, we welcome that. Also, it's hard to get information. We help write Freedom of Information Act letters, because the New York State Archive is not always very forthcoming in sharing the information that they have, if they have it. I mean, very often it's only a line in an intake book, but even families want that. So, and then women want their own information too. So those FOIA letters have been helpful. So one of the interviews that I did with the woman whose her great grandmother had been there in the 20s, and she talked about how her family had undergone this generations of trauma and institutionalization, from incarceration to mental institutions to foster care to orphanages. So I just share that because as a methodology, it's helpful, and we have a kind of a how-to, because there is a plan for this project to look at other institutions for other researchers that want to do that, to create kind of a national house for stories, first-person stories for people who are incarcerated, because every state had one of these institutions, pretty much, and many of them were open for 70, 80 years. So one of the great outcomes as well of this project was, and it was really, it was because in the film it even says that incorrigible is still listed as a subcategory of PINs in New York, but it's not. As of 2022, because of the work of Girls for Gender Equity and Julie Salazar, Senator Julie Salazar, she sponsored a bill saying that this is a term, incorrigible, that at least implicitly and in practice singles out girls of color for not matching expectations of stereotypical feminine behavior and labels them as uncorrectable or unreformable. And so that passed, and it was signed in July 2022. So it is no longer a box that can be checked in New York. And I love their sign, incorrigible, not incorrigible, which really is the crux of it. It's very often, girls act out because and no one's asking why they're running away from home, why they're not going to school, why they're doing all kinds of things, and very often they're running away from something, or they're running away because something's happening to them, and we need to support them and deal with the problem and not punish the behavior, because it just doesn't work. Oh, Assembly Bill A5873. How are we doing on time?
We have half an hour, so
okay, so we're good.
Yeah.
So there is a website, stories.incorrigibles.org. I just wanted to we're not going to spend time on it because you can go there yourself because there's so much material on it, but I just wanted to run through what's there because it really is a rich resource. There's testimonies from the New York State Training School for Girls. These are some of the interviews that have been edited that are on, and they're the more full versions than the kind of the clips that you heard in the video, and we're still adding to these. And these women are amazing, and the stories they tell are incredible. And it's not just limited to their time at the training school. It's what was happening in their lives and their family's life, what it was like at the institution, and where they are now, and what kind of wisdom they want to impart to young women in similar positions today. Expert Voices is a video project where experts in youth justice for girls kind of share their wisdom and kind of do answer questions. And it's many formerly incarcerated, other people who come from, Dr. Rita Sharon is a narrative medicine. She started a narrative medicine work here at Columbia. So really wonderful people and resources here. And then in the research area, there is a whole timeline of the history of youth justice, justice for girls when possible, but it's to contextualize it through time, starting in antiquity in the Middle Ages. So it really is a resource that we hope people will use. And then there's a map of institutions for girls in the US. This was the Osborne Society actually was mapping out these institutions in 1933. And many of them were institutions for girls that were open for, at least 70 plus years. So we use their map. And then these are some of the other institutions that we have connections with, either people that were there or historians or researchers that want to do their own research and story collection and ultimately add them here. So this is something that's growing as well. The exhibition is going to Connecticut in March, Eastern State University, and so we've been doing some research on the institution for girls that's there, the Long Lane School, which was also opened as an industrial school that closed even later than the training school. I think Wesleyan now has it, is using it as for their grounds. And so anyway, this is a resource, but I just wanted to show it to you so you could hopefully go there. And then I'm going to close with another project that's grown out of Incorrigibles and is tightly connected to it, which is, so Hilda is 83. Hilda was at the institution in the 50s, and her mother sent her there. Her mother, it's a long story, but basically she ran away from her home because her mother was abusive, and she ended up getting sent to the training school after she became pregnant and tried to go home to her mother because she had no other way to take care of her baby. And then they took her baby and sent it to Catholic Charities, but the judge promised Hilda always that she would be able to see the baby on the weekends, which was a total lie. So on the weekends, she would get beaten by the house mother. And while she was there, it turns out that the structure of the training school, and really the House of Refuge, was the cottage system, which came over from England. And it was specifically a system for incarcerating women, where they would kind of create family-like structures in cottages that felt like homes, and there would be like a house mother and a house father, and all the classes would be there. But Hilda, while she was there, was being consistently sexually abused by the house father, who would when New York passed the Child Victims Act. So I had met Hilda, and she had told me about this and asked me if there was anything that she could do about it, or, and I had said, because of the statute of limitations in New York State, it's impossible. I said, but you can share your story, you can come to events, you can, whatever would you feel would be healing for you or helpful for you to try and get justice, we'll do. But then New York passed the Child Victims Act in just before COVID. And part of the Child Victims Act, it raised the age of the statute of limitations to, I think, 55. But also there was a 1-year window, which they expanded to 2 years, called the look back window. So anyone of any age could file a suit against their abuser or the institution that should have protected them from abuse. So, so at that point, I said to Hilda, you can do it if you want. And so she did. There was a great law firm that tried to write a letter to settle her case with the state, and it didn't work. They said maybe it happened, but it's not our responsibility. And then they helped find another lawyer for her who was doing a lot of Child Victims Act cases in Albany. So, and her case is ongoing. But I asked Hilda once, she asked me to go to her deposition prep and deposition with her. A filmmaker friend of mine, Heather Greer, was over, and she said, would Heather want us to document it? So I called Hilda and I said, can we do a short documentary film about you standing up to finally get justice after all these years, suing New York State? It's like David and Goliath. And she said, yes. She said, but I want to film about my whole life. And so I said, well, maybe let's do this first, and then we'll see if we can get to that next. So I'm just gonna, so the film is pretty much almost done. We're just starting to submit it to film festivals. And then we'll have a whole kind of educational plan for it, where we can have conversations around things that need to be changed in many ways. But I'm just going to show you briefly the trailer, or the teaser, we call it, for Hilda's. This is Hilda. This looking at the state building in Albany, and we need to change things around. Yeah, we're going to change things around so we can. Let's see. Okay. Oh. We just need to be verified. We can continue. Okay, we're human. Twice. Mm. Try that one more time.
I'm here to meet with the lawyers of the state of New York, who I'm suing for the suffering, the pain. I'm 81 years old.
Oh, hold on one second.
And I still suffer with all the pain. And
here, we're going to the web, right? Yes. So let's try. Let's go to the beginning.
I should never put in that home.
All right, I'm going to try. I would like to restart it. We get to the beginning. Do that. Get it. Okay, wow, that's great. I'm gonna refresh it. Sorry for our technical difficulties. Here we go.
I'm here to meet with the lawyers of the state of New York, who I'm suing for the suffering, the pain. I'm 81 years old, and I still suffer with all the pain and hurt that was done to me in New York training school for girls. I was never bad. I was not bad. I should have never been put in that home. I'm just here to tell the truth. That I was being raped almost 3 times a week. I don't have any witnesses. The only witness is me, telling my story.
So Hilda's case, as I mentioned, is still ongoing. We decided to focus the documentary just on, her deciding to stand up for herself. It's been almost 4 years. It's, she got through one hurdle in that they wanted to know a specific date. They wanted to know dates of abuse. And so the lawyer was actually asked if she remember one holiday at least. And so there was like a New Year's Day. And so that was able to, allow her case to go forward because there was a date. We're still trying to find the name of the abuser. We have his photograph, but we don't have his name. And a lot of these cases are being thrown out because just because of time and because there's people can't prove what happened to them. And what is the legal term? There's one legal term that drives me crazy. It has to do with the fact that no, because in some cases they even have evidence that it was done. But since the people didn't speak up at the time to complain to the institution, these 15-year-old girls that because they didn't say something at the time, that it's that it's not the responsibility of the institution, because they didn't have the opportunity to do anything about it. So I forget what it's called, but so so basically that's my presentation. I want to thank everyone for being here and to the women who have opened up to me and who are now my partners in this project, who I love, and we get together every summer. And then we're continuing to do stories, and the exhibition is continuing to travel, and there will be a book that is the culmination of these different aspects of it.
Two questions?
Questions. Yeah, I'm gonna get
Peter has Peter and Vincent. You have
wait.
What's the current status I was wondering, what's the current status on young girls that are incarcerated right now? Right now, we usually, as you stated earlier, that it's 10% of women incarcerated in this country, and they don't get enough of attention. And sadly, they don't. But now, come to think about it, I could imagine just the adolescent, the juveniles. I could imagine they get even less of attention. And I was just wondering, what's the current status of their situation?
No, it's a great question. And I was reading, you know, the Vera Institute of Justice is really the organization that's doing the best work on that right now to end girls incarceration. You know, I remember it was probably a year or two ago, there was basically New York City had 0 girls in jail and in prisons. So and people are beginning to try and ask why girls are doing things and sometimes trying to intervene rather than just punishing them. But it's still, but the punitive nature of the system is so hard to get beyond. So and again, with this administration, it seems like everything's going somewhat backwards, and people's rights are not. It's, you know, a lot of things that were being fought for, that for better treatment and even small things are being kind of taken away. You know, at the training school, they were using solitary confinement as punishment, and you know, they would be, and there would be fed, you know, bread and milk, you know, and I know that in New York, you know, girls were no longer going to be incarcerated in adult facilities, but that's a slippery slope, you know. So because I'm working on the past, I know somewhat about the present, but I defer to Vera and other institutions and organizations to know more about the day-to-day of what's happening. And but my sense is, from what I've been reading, that it's not going to get better. But the reality is, kids don't belong in prison. They don't. Girls, boys, there's no reason for a young person to be in a prison. It's further traumatizing very often. You know, the majority of girls that are incarcerated have multiple traumas, you know, and high ACE scores, like adverse childhood experiences, and so it's just not a place that the treatment that's needed is going to be received.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, Mr. Speaker. I was just curious. So it seems like there were babies in the graveyard, and you mentioned some of the girls were pregnant when they were sent to the training school. I was wondering if you knew anything about what happened to the babies. Did they give birth whilst at the training school? Were the babies kept at the training school? I'm just curious what you know about that from your research. Thank you.
No, it's a very good question. And Nina Bernstein is the one that kind of was able to locate, you know, in the cemetery, which the girls and the babies that, you know, that died there, who were related. Since it was open for 70 years, from what I can understand, because the research is spotty, and the New York State Archives is not always the most open place around this institution for a reason I don't understand, but they had different policies. Sometimes girls would go be pregnant when they got there. They would give birth. In some cases, they would be able to keep the children for a little while. Very often, they would go to an orphanage. Sometimes a family member would take them. Nina Bernstein, though, you know, it wrote, or maybe she told me about, there was she did an interview with one of the staff members, and they talked about how sometimes the girls didn't want the babies, and so they would die from miasma or because they weren't being held, and so there was all different ways that the babies were treated, were wanted, and were and over time the institution had different policies about what they would do with babies, I think.
to go along with her question, were there children buried in this location? So I was wondering, like, is it legal, or has there been an attempt to do some like DNA evidence the of the bodies buried there to see if or even track of the children's, that because they probably could have been a product of sex abuse. They probably were conceived due to that. Like, is there any way where, or a strategy or method where you could find out, or has there been information that's been given that gives out information if these kids
No,
were?
well, thank you for that question, because that's my latest obsession is beyond trying to identify and find a history and families of the incarcerated, the babies and girls incarcerated there. It's, you know, after the ceremony, the memorial ceremony, I was talking to some of the people that in Albany who had given me permission to go there, and I said, you know, how do we know that because there's only about 12 headstones there. I said, how do we know that there's only 12 bodies here? And they said, well, we don't, and that's kind of why we put the fence so large. So, you know, the grounds are much larger than the headstones, and so I've reached out to 3 forensic anthropologists because I really, and no one's gotten back to me yet, but I really think it's important. I don't think that in this case, like the Nickel boys in Florida, you know, the institution in Florida, I don't think that there is going to be an issue of finding many bodies, but I do think there are other babies and girls buried there, and I do think that every single one of them should be acknowledged, and because no one should be forgotten. So that's is getting permission is going to be difficult, and I think finding a forensic anthropologist that would be willing to work on it. But I think, it's an important thing to do.
How about this ancestry.com? Do they provide any information, like if someone was to get their DNA, will their DNA track back to a staff member that worked in the facility? Like,
I mean, that's a very good question. I mean, I don't know if you can get DNA from, I mean, that would be way down the line in terms of being able to get access to the graves, being able to open them, trying to get the DNA from these bodies that are very old, and then I think some. Oh, from the people that are alive. Yeah. Yes, well, actually, one of the women that I spoke to, whose great grandmother was at the institution, her mother was a product of incest, and she. But she went on to Ancestry, and she realized that that wasn't the case. Like, her mother had always thought that. She found her grandmother had been sexually abused by her mother's boyfriend. So wait a second. She found out that she found her father, the mother's father, who had been looking for her. I'm not telling the story very well, but anyway, believe me. And it was hard to follow at the time, but she found, and she reunited her mother and her mother's father, who'd been looking for her, who she had always thought she never wanted to see him because she thought he had sexually abused her, but it was the mother's, and he had been looking for her. And so, and then they were reunited, and then he passed away maybe 4 months later.
Are you taking questions from people on Zoom?
It seemed like the worst crime that you covered in the cases that were presented was stealing a coat. Were there also violent offenders that were housed in the same facility? Or was it only like
There were,
abused children?
no, there were some violent offenders. In the box, there's this one newspaper clipping, gun girl bandit steals taxi. So there's, there were some violent crimes, girls that had committed violent crimes. And they were there. I think one of the reasons it closed in 1975, there was a law that was passed that said that girls that had committed more violent crimes couldn't be housed with girls that were there for status offenses, which are status offenses are things that you wouldn't get arrested for if you were of older. So truancy, running away, and things like that. So yes, there were some more aggressive offenses, and there was a lot of violence at the institution, from what I heard. I mean, there was because of that, and also because of the history of trauma that people are untreated trauma that people were dealing with. There was, there was some violence that would happen, girl on girl too.
Well, we know that in the House of Refuge, there were two categories of girls that were sent there. One was the girls who had committed crimes, and the other one was preventative confinement.
Right. Well, and controlling women's sexuality and girls' sexuality,
Exactly.
like let's
Yeah.
get them out.
Yeah,
Just
exactly.
let's put them away.
I worked at a boys equivalent of Hudson, and they actually, I found some notes that I had gotten from the boy. They used to write letters to their mother in the class, and there was a draft, and they said, we're going to a dance at Hudson. I meant to show Allison that. So there was some interconnection between, it was called Oldestville School for Boys, and there's a web page you can get, because what we did was they made films, and their films are up online. They made 16 millimeter. This was before video. I worked there from like 67 to 72, and they made film, both 16 millimeter and Super 8 films. But the Super 8 films they used to take home, but the 16 millimeter they didn't take home because they didn't have a way to play them. One of the things that we did, there was a lot of tension in the community about these bad boys, because in those days, they did not have any fences. And the kids were able to they didn't have orange jumpsuits. It's very different than it is now. And even though there were some of them were there for murder, but they were, the attitude was that they would not fence them. And but the surrounding people, a lot of whom worked at the place, but the others were worried about it. So I think the institution saw the films that they made as a way of showing the community that these were just regular kids, and so I would take them out to show their films at libraries, and one of the places were in other institutions. And we never went to Hudson, but we did go to one called Highland, which I couldn't leave there without. I was crying. There were 6 and 7-year-old boys there, and they were lined up, and it was, and then they were watching these films, which I actually probably weren't appropriate for these kids, because a lot of them were about drugs or whatever, but they wanted it was a way of entertaining them, I think, something, or teaching, like Scared Stiff or something, keeping them from going there. But just to emphasize about Vera, I remember the Vera Institute came to actually inspect the school, and they came to my class, and but they also went to the cottages. That word cottages was something that they would call a huge, long dormitory, totally sterile, lined up, beds lined up cottages. And that was not, there are some of them, you can see the cottage, the so-called cottages in some of the films that Otisville makes. It's called Otisville's, the Film Club at Otisville. If you Google that, it's up on YouTube.
Thank you, Dee Dee.
We have students in JIE who were sent to juvenile detention at the age of 8. I mean, we currently have them, so it's not, it hasn't stopped. I mean, it's within our experience. I want to ask one of, and then we'll have to stop with it. I want to ask one of Mia's questions. Mia sent me a couple questions that she would have asked had she been here. And this is the question of audience, right? Who is the audience and the viewership of this project? Whom are you looking towards as you're putting this project together? And along with that is, what are the different, is this, I mean, it is obviously interdisciplinary, it is obviously multimedia, but how expansive or how wide do you see this interdisciplinarity or multimedia texture of the project? So whom are you addressing and how? I guess that's.
It's a good question, and I think the media and the audience are combined because it is a transmedia project. There's a traveling exhibition, there is a book, there are films, there's free public programs, there's intergenerational workshops, and I think they all happen around the same time, but they're all for different audiences. Right. So, and the project itself is really for the women. It's for women who were formerly incarcerated. It's for women from the training school to kind of find one another and find community again. And I found that even with the exhibition, it brings things out in people that it's not an art exhibition. Because even when I was in Newburgh, we realized that a gallery sitter isn't the kind of person that should be there. You almost need someone that is a therapist that can talk to people, because once people see, there is so much trauma and there's so much sexual abuse that people have experienced in this country and in this world that is so unacknowledged, that once you start seeing these stories and hearing what other people have experienced, it brings things out in you. And then I also think there's different audiences based on different locations where the exhibition goes, because when it was at the Brooklyn Federal Courthouse, you have people that are waiting for trials or they're getting new citizenships. It was at the New York City Municipal Archives, and so you have people there that are researching records for themselves and things, and then when during COVID it was shut down, and so the exhibition was there for a long time, and then I heard that somehow the police were stationed there for like 2 weeks, and so they were looking at the exhibition. So and then in Newburgh there was it was in an art gallery, but an art gallery that's part of Safe Harbors on the Hudson, which is a kind of a housing for formerly homeless, for unhoused people. Yeah, and so some of those people came, and then we did the workshops with young women in the community who. I think that the book will have another audience as well, because it will be able to be disseminated more easily, because you have to go to an exhibition, and that's also why the website exists, so people can go to the web and listen to stories, and there are different audiences that are going to use different aspects of it.
All right, so before I thank Alison and Mia in absentia, I want to say that we have dinner for everyone downstairs, and I want to thank you for coming. But Alison, thank you so much for bringing the project here to us, talking to us about it. It's a great project, and I'm looking forward to seeing more of it, as you know, and we can look at the diary, right?
You can look at the book, and then I have postcards for Hilda's film, and no, thank you so much for the invitation and for being here.